Okay, so we're live. Hello, Frank.
Hey, Vladimir.
Yeah, today we are going to talk about epistemology.
Yep.
And can you start just repeating what you said about this division?
So, like
between...
I said before we started, that's what epistemology is and how we solve. Yeah. Okay. But yeah. So, epistemology, the definition formally, study of knowledge. If you want to know, like, you have a test in philosophy for anybody here who's a philosophy student who's watching this, they're going to tell you the definition you need to provide for the answer is going to be, justified true belief, the classic philosophy definition that comes from Plato's Theaetetus. I think I pronounced that right, but it's an old dialogue. It's pretty much where that particular definition comes from, where it's traced back to. And yeah, epistemology for me, I was just telling Vladimir, I was just telling you this, is really, it's where the rubber meets the road for a lot of formalization of philosophy. Specifically, historically, if you know where analytical philosophy and continental philosophy kind of broke off from each other around Whitehead and Russell's work on Principia Mathematica, analytical philosophy in many ways could be summed up with them saying, you know what, we don't want to deal with one aspect of philosophy, metaphysics, everything with metaphysics. We just kind of want that out the side. We're going to hyper focus epistemology down into the ground is what they kind of did. And a lot of that can be seen in the way we look at formalization and of how we applied logic philosophy to that era, and a lot of the assumptions that got thrown in and the way they kind of tackled everything. I should point out they cut out metaphysics, and about half a century went by and it blew up in their face is what happened, because they got hit with logical positivists or empiricists got hit with work by people from their own group. You had like Kuhn and Popper. Quine attacked him with two dogmas of empiricism. Wittgenstein, the very person that they worship for his Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, came back with philosophical investigations, which pretty much just threw them all under the bus. But that being said, I'm kind of joking at them, but the work they did and the work that continues to be done in this field from formalization is some of my favorite work in philosophy. And I feel for a lot of other people it is too, because it is, parts of it are really, really good, just amazing. There are parts of epistemology, obviously, outside of this, continental philosophy. We got it going all the way back to Plato. I was just telling you Theaetetus. Aristotle did a bunch of work in it when bringing in empiricism. The empiricists just across the board, Berkeley, Locke, Hume did a ton of work. Rationalists, we got Descartes coming up with the idea if can there even be certain knowledge, and skepticism challenging it, and Kant coming up with the analytic and synthetic, the a priori and the a posteriori off of Hume's matters of fact, and truths of reason. There's a lot here, and it's a real fun field. And
if you open up, as far as I understand, like with Russell and Whitehead, right? They decided that metaphysics is something that we don't want to talk about, right? So that
it was by consequence of metaphysics kind of being part, or it still kind of is by many people seen as part as is religion, the underlying context.
So, but
like we just want to cut that out.
It's like, can we say that everything is then physical, according to this epistemological point of view, or
that was certainly what they were going for. Like I said, it blows up in their face, kind of spoiler alert, but yeah. Or at least that's my point of view eventually. But that'd be kind of what we were getting at. We get things from Russell and early Wittgenstein, and I use these concepts because they are good concepts. Things known as atomic fact or atomic proposition. Atomic in this context just means the simplest way we can say something, and fact just means the simplest way. We'll get into this later, but the simplest way we can state circumstance, and atomic propositions are the simplest way we can say something exists. and they are trying to formally reduce the way that we can address ontology as well as bodies of knowledge. My definition of knowledge, I haven't said it yet, by the way.
Mhm.
I should drop this before I go any further, is my definition of knowledge is a body or an aggregate or a group of facts about a subject is what it is. The interpretation and discovery of that body of facts around a subject.
So
And
it has foundation. It's like, can I say that it's foundationalism? So it's like it has foundation in something, like in a subject, or
it can. Okay, so the whole point, we haven't gotten into this, but the whole point of this definition and what's going to come later, which is the definition of fact, is reconciling the two theories of truth in epistemology, as well as getting rid of the word truth in epistemology, which is the coherence theory and the correspondence theory, kind of reconciling, like, because my argument is, like it has happened so many times before with talks of you, and it's going to keep happening with me. I think they're discussing two different things. And if we really work them out, we can understand what the two of them are actually getting at and make it work in the same system of thought.
So, but what's the problem in philosophy in separating these two? Like why they must be separated?
My argument would be, okay, I've defined knowledge. Before I have to do this, I have to define fact now, because my definition of knowledge has fact in it, and fact's kind of a big deal. A fact is, an assertion or proposition that has true or false value in reference, okay? So objective reference, all right? And states a circumstance in the most reductive logical form. That's really formal. So let me break that down. So to give an example, if I say, I'll use my phone again. The phone is an electronic device, all right? Or something like that. That is something, I'm referencing something in the world. It can be true that it is an electronic device, or it can be false that it turns out that it's not an electronic device, all right? And I'm stating an observed or experienced circumstance in the world, all right? A case, okay? This would be like something that happens, all right? This is connecting it to classical induction. I'm getting a general conclusion, observed conclusion that this is the case, not a probable one. So, okay, this is how I reduce it down to a logical well-formed formula or a logical expression. It would just be that P is the case. It has to be reducible down to one variable of a given translation using parentheses. It has to be that simple in all cases.
But if we have an idea, like if we discuss an idea which we can refer to, like something, for example, like an idea like justice, right? You can point, well, you may point out some certain situation, right? And say this, in this situation, this person behaves justly or unjustly. But you can point out to justice, right? Or you
can't, okay, if it's going to be a fact, and I'll break this down further to like syntactical, so sentence structure, okay? If it's going to be a fact, it needs to be different than like an opinion or like, and you know, something where you're using adjectives or adverbs or qualifiers, things like that, all right? So it's not that you're not saying my opinion or my belief of, or, you know, or you're saying something, you're just stating what is. That's all you're doing. You're stating what is, what has happened in front of you. That's what a fact is.
If we try to define something, if we give a definition, for example, now we discuss knowledge, right? And you give me a definition of knowledge, and I may say, you know, your definition is correct, but I have a different definition, and it slightly disagrees with yours. And like in this case, there's no fact. We can't actually. Probably we can try to discuss it and find out whose definition is better, but still there's no there's nothing that we can point out and say, look, this is what it is.
Yeah, well, that's you're getting at another problem that lays under this, which is kind of like, yes, I can do this fact, and I can be objective in it and everything, and I can have these definitions, but definitions, and I said this, I think 2 discussions ago, definitions are assumed. There's something you come up with, we do have a kind of authority in definitions where, we have like, I have Webster's dictionary next to me right here that I could look at like, well, Webster says this is the thing or thing, but that doesn't really carry on the semantics of use of words. People can mean different things when they say different things in different contexts, given who's expressing it. And Webster may be able to give you a general, in a certain language, kind of set of meaning to a word, but it's not going to specifically reference a given person. The only way is to ask that person, and hopefully they have the ability to express it properly and express what they mean. But in all cases, it's going to be something they have to come up with. They have to assume and just be like, at that time, to have an expression to it.
So can you
I'm
help
getting
me?
off track a little bit here.
Can you help me? Like, you differentiate knowledge from opinion, but is there any difference between knowledge and fact?
I differentiate fact from opinion. Fact and opinion.
Okay, but knowledge?
Okay, knowledge. Well,
so justified true belief. I've heard something about Gettier problem.
Yep, the Gettier problem. There's a couple of them, but let's stop. Okay, so as knowledge is a set of facts, and facts are not opinions, by consequence, yes, knowledge would not be, opinions by that logic. Okay, the biggest difference that I want to point out is opinions and fact, because opinions and knowledge, that's kind of, we're treating a side effect at that point. The place that we really get the illumination is understanding what an opinion is and a fact. Okay, and I can show this once again syntactically. I kind of already did, where if someone says, the coffee cup is metal, all right, that's a fact. Versus if someone says, in my opinion, that coffee cup is stupid or something like that. You look at that, or stupid, or, I don't know, or too big or something like that. That's an opinion. One of these things, that it's metal, can be tested, references something about this can be tested, and we can find out if it's true or false. Given that it can be falsified. Okay. The other one, my opinion, the coffee cup is stupid, uses a qualifier. Qualifiers shift scope of statements from an objective thing, the coffee cup, to their opinion of the coffee cup. Their opinion of the coffee cup is an objective thing. It's a metaphysical thing. It can't be proven right or wrong. It just is their opinion on the stating of the area. So they could also say my belief of the coffee cup, or, from my perception, and this is going to get into another area, from my perception, the coffee cup is stupid. Qualifiers are great. I can tell someone right now, if you want to go the rest of your life without ever being told that you're wrong, learn to use qualifiers. You could possibly do it if you just use qualifiers. You can make it so you could never possibly be told that you are wrong, because everything will be in your opinion or my belief, or in some sense. But the biggest reason we have to differ between these deals with two concepts of how we get knowledge, and this is arguing a little bit in favor of correspondence. Understand, I need to point this out right now. Don't put me in team correspondence or coherence, because I'm not in either team. You're going to lose me if you try to put me in either one. But this is arguing a little bit in correspondence favor, where I'm going to say it deals with a theory or something they use in philosophical and law terms called mea culpa. It's a Latin phrase. It means admission of error. Okay, and a big part of how we have knowledge of objective things, how we have things in the world, deals with wrongness, possibility of wrongness in our assertions towards that objective thing. If you remember when we were talking in our last discussion, I talked about two concepts, precision and accuracy. You remember that? There was a dartboard and I said I was throwing at things. Okay. Anyway, I'll bring it up again.
Okay.
So, okay. When I'm saying wrongness is a big deal, what I'm referring to is not precision, but accuracy. I'm saying it's not enough, you know, to say something about something. You need to have the possibility that you can be wrong about that thing. Okay. If I'm throwing an arrow at a dartboard, okay, I need to be able to call out something if the entire wall is red, okay? And I say, I'm going to hit the red thing. Somebody would say, that's not accurate or objective at all, because the only possible thing you could do is hit the red thing. There's no way you could hit, no, it's not very accurate. But if the entire wall and most of the board is green, all right, and there's just a small little red dot in the area, and I say, I'm going to hit the red, then someone goes, oh, that's very accurate. That's very objective if they do that at that point, because there's such a huge possibility of them being wrong prior. So if we're going to understand how we have a fact, and then by extension, how we have knowledge as the body of those facts, it's important that we understand that it exists. And this is going into another, God damn, we are just going through these. Another one of your questions, which is the uncertainty of knowledge, which I'm going to argue, and I can get further. I'm going to let you speak for a little bit because I've been just going on a tirade.
Okay.
I'm going to argue that knowledge is inherently uncertain eventually, but it doesn't matter where I'm going. What matters is how I get there.
Knowledge is inherently uncertain.
Necessarily or inherently uncertain is what I'm going to say.
But I still didn't get like the difference between precision and accuracy. So when there's there like accurate, it's to aim at a certain point, right?
A very certain thing.
Yeah, and reach this point. But precision, like, what's the difference?
Precision would be if, you know, if there was a dartboard up there or no dartboard up there or just anything up there. And instead of one dart, I had a handful of darts. Okay. You know, like 10 darts. And I didn't call out anything. I just started throwing the darts, you know, and they happened to create a grouping in one area like that. All right. So that would be precise when I have the grouping. It doesn't matter if I hit the thing I was going to say, or, you know, if I didn't or I did, what I didn't even say anything. I'm just doing something consistently and able to create a group out of it. That's what precision is.
So if you try to consistently define something, and you know, you get closer and closer to make
the thing is, with being consistent, you can be getting closer and closer to something. Of course, that something could be something that's fictional, non-existent, or, you know, something, an abstract concept that doesn't even align with your initial assertion or proposition. You know, accuracy isn't a part of this. This is what I'm saying. So you will be closing in on something, but whether or not that thing is what you intended to be, or as you understand it, it may totally not be. You know, you can have precision and not accuracy, and you can have accuracy and not precision.
Okay.
Two different things.
Yes. Let me ask you about such things like epistemologically, you know, there's a distinction, epistemologically subjective, epistemologically objective, which we talked about like just before. And like you may have knowledge about ontologically objective and subjective. So you may have knowledge about ontologically objective things, right? Such as, you know, things around. But there are ontologically subjective things like your, you know, your feelings or emotions, which only you have, and nobody else can even, like, you know, nobody else can experience the same emotions. For example, pain, right? And can you have knowledge about your ontologically subjective experience?
Ontologically subjective.
And can you have knowledge about somebody else's ontologically subjective experience? So if you
not the way I just defined knowledge. No, you cannot.
So well, you may have some in this dichotomy between precision and accuracy. Like if,
Yes.
for example, you want to know, like I can tell you, I feel pain, right?
Yes.
It means something for you, but you don't exactly know what I feel. You may have only kind of a model or an idea.
Here's a big thing that's going to kind of put this in perspective. What would be the difference of you saying, I know I have pain versus I believe I have pain?
I don't know. It's like
I would say there's no difference.
Yeah, for me, it's the same.
Like for you, I would say it's the exact same thing because you're speaking from an area of authority, your authority of yourself that, I believe or I know. In either case, it's entailed. I'm assuming this in both cases, either case, you're the person who, experiences the pain. So a lot of ontological subjectivism, I look and I go, and this is going to seem like, I don't mean this as an insult or a blow off to some people. I'm just saying this, given my definitions, what follows. I'm going to go and I'm going to say, no, that's metaphysics. You're talking about metaphysics at that point. If I can't differentiate, the biggest thing about knowledge to me is that it differentiates itself from belief. Okay. So and I was getting at this with the opinions and syntax. You notice how I could say things about, syntactically using qualifiers or something like that. I could never be wrong. They could cite something that isn't objective, my feelings or my opinions or something like that, and they, in a way, morph the argument into a way that it's an argument from authority that can't be challenged or, can't be referenced from another person because it's dependent on my lens alone. So when I'm really making it so the person can't even argue with me. So or doubt what I'm saying, can't even doubt it. So at that point, I would say, nah, that's not knowledge. That's metaphysics. If it goes to that point, and this kind of comes back to something I've said in videos before. Oh boy, we are going to cover a lot of ground here, I talked about how if you have empiricism, you ought to be skeptic. Skepticism and empiricism, I was like, they go hand in hand. I'm going to say something else. Knowledge and skepticism go hand in hand. So if you say you have knowledge of something, but you can't even possibly doubt the thing you have knowledge of, you can't even think of a way to challenge it or go at it, I'm going to look and I go, that's metaphysics. That's not knowledge, and this transitive property is going to carry over. If you just saw what I did with skepticism, with empiricism, and with knowledge.
And when I talk about my feelings or emotions, of course, I have ultimate authority, right? You can basically argue with me, right?
I could think about this. If someone, because when you're a kid, this sometimes does happen. You're like, where you experience something like you fall down, you get hurt.
Yeah, you pretend that you feel pain and
or something like that, and someone may call you out and be like, oh, you're pretending, or it's not real or anything, but they don't know. How the fuck can they contextualize your feeling of pain? They look at symptoms, they look at things that we got this with ethics when I said it implies morality. They look at things that kind of may indicate pain or something like this, but they don't feel your pain. They don't actually, have a way to definitively go, you're not feeling pain right now. They could even look at the nerve firings in your brain, and that may be indicative of pain, something that we causally link to pain. Though the problem with it, oh, God damn it. This is going now into identity theory. The problem is we know that is not indicative of pain in all cases, like an octopus per se, which has different anatomy. Nor is that even available to people in all cases to look at nerve. Okay, I'm going to stop right now. Do you have any other questions? Because I'm going off on all these tangents here.
Besides the correspondence theory of truth and coherence theory of truth, there's pragmatic theory of truth.
Yes.
And social constructivism and consensus theory and deflationary theory and redundancy theory. the whole list of them.
Everyone has a theory.
Yeah, let's take the pragmatic theory of truth.
Okay. The
how it
pragmatic
relates to.
theory.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. The pragmatic theory of truth, as I understand it, qualifier,
Mhm.
is basically what works or what is useful is true. This is modern pragmatism, not a
Mhm.
classical. So basically, the idea is, if I have a theory about what is objectively the case or anything, and I'm able to apply it in some way that gives me usually positive feedback, reinforces my hypothesis, that's what I say is true. And I have a problem with this.
Mhm.
Basically, the thing is, okay, I'm going to argue that this is usually someone who takes like a classical stance on empiricism and usually says, what's useful is true. What's practical, is like the objective representation of our world. And the thing is, I'm going to go back and go, no, practicality is actually really subjective. It is really based on a good way that I usually show this to people is I go, there are people that will argue, I've met them, that horoscopes are useful to them.
Mhm.
And I'll look and I'm like, are horoscopes true by that logic then?
Mhm.
And they would go, well, not that. That's on there.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay. There are people that will argue that the Farmer's Almanac is useful. Is that true by that logic then? Or there are people that will argue, I'll give them more credit. There are people that will argue that Newton's expression of force, F equals ma, is useful. It is useful. Is that true? And this is an area where usually I give a lot of people who are from the T or E area, technicians or engineers of STEM, who will argue like, well, yeah. I'm like, no, it was disproven by Einstein's theory of relativity. We know at speeds of light, F equals ma does not hold your speeds of light.
Mhm.
Ergo, it's useful and we can use it in many areas, but objectively, no, it's not true in representing the world. It's
Yeah, but
definitively
the whole, I guess the whole point of pragmatic theory of truth is that it doesn't matter. Truth is not important. What important is what works. And
uh, okay.
so they basically they deny that truth has any value if it doesn't work, if you can't apply
yeah.
it for certain purposes.
And I know tons of pure mathematicians that would tell them to fuck off, but
Mhm.
not tons. I know a couple,
Mhm.
but the pure mathematician takes pride in being useless. Let's just put it that way.
Mhm. Mhm.
But the idea that I look at, and okay, this is going to be giving the pragmatist more. I think pragmatists are dealing more so with what I defined with as facts.
Mhm.
There was concerned about objectively representing things in the world that can be possibly wrong, okay? And just doing what works, getting the work done, moving on, that old gumption. The thing about that though is I look and I go, that's great, but if you're going to be objective in representing these facts, or you want your usefulness to be more than just the subjective thing of people talking about horoscopes or something like that, then it has to have some way of being wrong. Or the useful thing, okay, this was another thing we discussed earlier. The useful thing has to be in a state where if it comes up by a model or an idea or something that could be possibly more useful, or you could do better or anything,
Mhm.
you need to understand, you need to let the other one go and embrace it, not just hold on to that pragmatic area. But this is what works. And it's like, yes, but this might work better. You need to still strive. Put this in area. I would often say, if the world was nothing but pragmatists, we never would have discussed works of like Maxwell's, unification of electromagnetism. Okay. We would never understand some of the more abstract ideas that would later become so essential to how we understand the world today. They're very much based in abstract fields or theoretical fields that at the time we didn't know how to apply them, and a pragmatist would just look at that and say, oh, this is useless, ergo, it does nothing. And I'm like, knowledge in itself is to strive and to kind of, it may potentially be useful later on. You need to learn to, damn, I'm going into another tangent. Okay, so let's just say for the time being that my criticism of pragmatism is often the dismissal of the pursuit or the furthering of our understanding in the area of what works, and also showing that what's practical can be highly linked to what's subjective for the person who's looking at it. And it does have redeeming qualities in that it can be used in a very effective manner to continuously address practical matters. Okay, so that'd be summation.
Okay, how about social constructivism?
Another huge problem.
Postmodernist ideas.
Yes. There is truth to, there is truth to social constructivism, and there's a lot of error. But let's unpack it really quick, because there's something that social constructivists say that I've been saying as consequence, that a lot of their work is based on like old style Hegelian and Kantianism understandings of reality, which is a two-stage understanding process.
It looks very close, very similar to coherence theory of truth, right? That every element fits together, but you may just basically, it depends on how you.
A lot of it has to deal with, I said earlier, we see everything through a lens, right? And social constructivism is saying, well, society, as we're part of it, kind of sees everything from a lens. And as we're born into society, there are, and this would be the coherence, there's like a sea of facts or everything that work in a coherent matter that are presupposed. And there is truth to this. I'd say much of what you're describing right now is less so scientific discovery and more so a take on history, or the set, the set of pre-existing facts, okay, that describe circumstance over and over and over again, okay? So I just hit you with another definition. So knowledge would be, the sets of all facts regarding a subject. History would be the set of all pre-existing facts, that describe circumstance, all right? So that makes sense? Just like history is just like, I'm objectively representing what has happened prior, over and over and over again. That's all I'm doing. I'm not discovering it, I'm just representing it in a manner that can be understood.
Just a description of what happened.
Yep. Okay. Now, the problem with social constructivists, when I get at it, is when someone says, oh, it's just this area, it's just this this pre-existing area of facts, and this will go into coherent areas. I'm going to look, I'm like, okay, so the other side was super focusing accuracy, and you're super focusing precision over here. You're doing a different thing. You're talking about representing pre-existing things consistently in terms of those pre-existing things, And I was like, where they were all about objectively representing things, you're about consistently representing them to other subjects, Okay, so my basic place would be like, if that was the case, then science would be nothing more than a large game of like telephone, us communicating what we said to, if you've ever played telephone where someone says something into another person's ear over and over again. And I'd be like, if this was the case, that there was no objectivity in what we say, and there couldn't be any objectivity in what we say, then the problem that comes about is, what about everything in air and all the positive or negative feedback that we get from our hypothesis over on the correspondence side?
What if just one knowledge survives, which is stronger and more, more important at any particular moment in history, and others just disappear? So if we take a look at, for example, 500 years and say, okay, we're doing science, but what was science 500 years ago now it's not the case. Science is different. We use different
Yes.
notions. We still preserve something from that period, but most of
We're constantly reapplying it.
yeah,
We're not just saying it's not tradition. It's not just a history that we're saying we're preserving it for the sake of preserving it. We're constantly reapplying it in individual or group experiences that can be falsified, reforming theories based on those hypotheses and redoing it. And
from social constructivist sphere, we simply say that we can't accept everything as objective truth, right? And we always can, like with new experience and social experience especially, we may always redefine what happened before. Right, and we may use different terms, different ideas, but when there's this, for example, I like to bring up this idea of atom. Right, for ancient Greek philosophers, atom meant just something indivisible, right?
Yeah.
And in 19th century they split it an atom, but actually it's important. Like in the terms of ancient Greek philosophers, it's like it's something silly. You can't split an atom. It's just it's
you can't split because I defined it as it can't split.
Right, right.
And we say we can split it because we discovered and then later defined it as something that yes can be split.
Yeah, it's like something totally different, but still like there's some
we mean something different than the Greek philosophers did. We have different semantics about something that we may translate the same.
And so, for example, let's suppose in few hundred years, scientific community decides, let's name it again atom and say that those things which now we call leptons or quarks, let's call them atoms. Like in order to it makes sense. And then like all field of like historical field of science, like 20th century, will basically make no sense from some higher point if we are going to reach it in the future.
Well, this is the thing.
Well, it will make sense, but it will be redefined and we'll reconstruct it in a different way, right?
Well, what you're kind of seeing here is, okay, I just shat on cohesion a bit and social constructive theory. Now I'm going to argue for it a bit because what I'm going to say is, yes, what you're kind of showing is, yes, the words and the language that we use to convey these facts objectively, and here's the big word, consistently and precisely matter. They do matter. If you at one point refer to one thing as an atom, then at another point refer to it as a banana, and then at another point refer to it as a gimglop, no one's going to understand what the fuck you're talking about or if the things consistently represent that. And it also matters to the scientific method in itself, and the fact that we can reproduce the rigor, that we can consistently understand how we addressed a certain situation with objectivity and reproduce the results, that we have to document how we did it, consistently bring that back to a similar situation and redo it. So, and yes, all this is based on how we contextualize, translate, or get things in ways both that we can understand it as we review our, our own scientific or experiences or anything like that, or as, other people can experience through language. We have to bring it into that area. So the biggest thing, science to me, okay, because this is very much so dealing with science in epistemology to me, science and correspondence, the correspondence to me with our definitions of fact and knowledge prior and history, I'm going to say that correspondence theory deals with discovery of facts. It's trying to discover, okay? Increase the body of facts or trim the fat or, reconsolidate it, all right? It's a consistent and synthetic process. I just used a Kant word. Synthetic means that it's a process that is constantly being used and applied through experience, okay? Okay. And that's what science is. But I'm also going to argue science is a specific pursuit of a body of knowledge, okay? And knowledge works off of, as it is, a way, how do I say this? As knowledge is the body of facts regarding a certain subject, okay? and it differentiates itself from belief. Remember when we were talking about belief and I said you had authority with the way that you said you thought your own thing or anything.
Mhm.
And a big thing about those facts and everything that it can be proven wrong or expressed in a way that differentiates itself is that it can be expressed in an objective way. It can be spoken of in a
Mhm.
coherent way that someone else can understand and prove or disprove or
Mhm.
have, like experiences of.
So
So-
let me wrap it up. So there's science, like we build a certain knowledge,
Mhm.
which is coherent, and at the same time it's independent from any subject. So any new person who is born may just learn all these facts, and for everyone they are going to be the same facts, right?
Well, no, I am saying it's very dependent. I am saying it's very dependent on the person. So I'm arguing a little bit in favor of social constructivists. I'm saying it's very dependent on the society, the people, whoever's
Mhm.
doing these things,
Mhm.
because that's how they're going to communicate these facts and how we're going to be able to look at it through the veil of history, or how they would even, I would communicate facts to you or something like that in a way that can be falsified. But at the same time, I'm looking at that and I'm going, but that's not all there is to it. Because a huge part of this isn't just the communication of pre-existing facts. It's also discovery of new facts
Mhm.
that, come about through not just communication, but error, the
Mhm.
possible wrongness of facts, and the possible validation of facts.
So
So
integration of new facts into the previously existed
yes,
body of knowledge.
yes,
Okay, I think I get
or
it.
possible disapproval of pre-existing facts. It could be either one.
Yeah, it's like Euclidean geometry, and then another geometry.
We find out that when we try to apply Euclidean geometry to the
Mhm.
real world, the fifth postulate, two parallel lines will remain equidistant for an infinite amount of time, doesn't work because we live on a curved surface.
Yeah,
And
and still
therefore,
we use the Euclidean geometry, like in.
yeah, we still use it, we still teach it,
Mhm.
and it's still super cool. I
Mhm.
mean, but if you're going to talk about practical things, you have elliptical and hyperbolic geometry that deals with curved surfaces and allows you to better approximate things in a
Mhm.
practical sense. Ooh, that was a
Mhm.
lot.
Let's move on to beliefs. I would
More.
like there's two major theories, like representationalism and functionalism.
Okay.
So according to representationalism, it's a belief, it's an attitude that we hold towards proposition, kind of
Mhm.
propositional attitudes. And
Yeah.
like it seems that, well, I think I can understand this. So belief simply, it's not just in my head.
Mhm.
It's a certain attitude which appears whenever I deal with a new proposition. So whenever somebody says something, I may believe that this is true or it's not true.
Mhm.
And also there's like directions of feet. If you're familiar with this concept, like mind to world direction of feet, and
Yeah.
world to mind direction of feet, and belief has a mind to world direction of feet. So for a belief to be true, it must refer to something in the world. There's no intention to change the world, unlike desires, which have a different direction of feet, and to be satisfied, you have to change the world. So you say something, if it doesn't match the world, doesn't matter. What's matter what you're saying. And in belief, what you say, you have to. Again, it's just knowledge, right? So just justified knowledge. You say, I know something, or I believe in something, because, and then you give some reasons, and then you say how you came up with this. You basically justify your belief.
Okay. So first thing I'm going to address is representationalism, specifically on its more simplified ground that every proposition, every assertion has like a representation, or is a meaning or something that's into it. Like schmoogly dong has a clear meaning.
I don't even know what it is.
I don't know what it is either. There,
Okay.
I disproved it. Anywho, but the thing that I get this is, okay, there's a classic concept in semiotics, which is the study of symbols. Okay. Symbolism, and these two concepts are called signifier and signified, if you've ever heard them.
Yeah, I guess I've heard something.
Basically,
but you may clarify it.
Yeah. Basically, if you want to think of it in this way, in this context, it will help us. If we think of like the thought is the signifier, and what I'm saying, or I'm sorry, the thought is the signified, and how I say it is the signifier. It's how I'm signifying it. Okay. And this is a real classical way of looking at philosophy. I have a thought and I have my way of expressing the thought. Okay. And I can show mathematically why this can't be the case, why it can't possibly be the case. You know, this classic interpretation that we have a representation in our head and we can say it clearly for all instances. I said I wouldn't use the whiteboard. Anywho, so what I'm going to say is there's these, how do I want to say it? Concepts in set theory called functionality. Okay. It's how we pair things together. All right. And these concepts, three we're going to focus on are going to be called bijective functionality, injective functionality, and surjective functionality. Okay.
Bijective, injective, surjective. Okay.
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
And
like,
this is basically
I don't even know what it means, but yeah, I could.
You don't know what it means. You don't have a reference, but I got it.
Okay.
We're just trashing this freaking way of thought. But if you think about, okay, if you think about apples and baskets, okay, I have apples and I have baskets, right? Injective functionality would state that all my apples have exactly one basket. There's one basket to one apple, okay? For all instances. Now, there can be apples without a basket, okay? And there can be baskets without apples, but what there can't be is an instance when there's two apples in a basket, or there's two baskets to an apple. There's always that nice 1-to-1 ratio, okay? And surjective functionality, basically, if we're thinking about apples and baskets again, basically says, now I can have two apples in a basket or two baskets to an apple with surjective functionality, but what I can't have is an apple or a basket by itself, left over by itself. What the idea is. Okay, you got those two?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Bijective functionality is basically pairing injective and surjective functionality, okay? Bringing them together. It's how we say we have a perfect pairing, okay? I have one apple to one basket for all instances. There are no apples or baskets left over. I can say that this apple certainly is paired with this basket, and this basket is certainly paired with this apple for all instances, okay? You may start seeing where I'm going with the thought and how we express it here, where I'm saying a pairing between thought and expression right here. So let's say I have thoughts, okay? And the mode of language that I have to express these thoughts happens to be English. All right. And
yeah, but different language.
Yeah, you're starting to see it. But we'll just stay inside English for right now. Even inside English in itself, someone goes and they
synonyms.
Got it. You have synonyms, you have homonyms, you have more than one way to express, or multiple thoughts that could be expressed to the same word at this point. So what we're showing right here is we're showing that given the English language and the laws that were provided for, there cannot be a perfect pairing given the thought and the speech. It's impossible. And someone may, and what this means for representationalists who say everything must refer or be paired to something, I'm sitting here and I'm like, it'd be impossible for everything to be one-to-one paired to everything. I'm showing mathematically how it can't be the case. Now, let's say someone walks up and they go, well, what if we had a simple language, a simpler, nicer language? We cleaned it up like French. French is a clean language. People work on it all the time. And I'm like, oh. But whatever hits with injective functionality, with homonyms, synonyms, or anything like that, there's another problem, which is surjective functionality, where it says I can't have a thought or a word exist that is impaired, having an apple or anything like that. And thus we get back to schmoogly dong. What is the pairing of schmoogly dong? If you can't say it, I can't say it. No one can say the pairing.
I can say schmoogly dong.
Yeah. And if I can just come up with words that I don't necessarily have a pairing, which we can do in any language, babies speak gibberish. Crazy people speak gibberish. I speak it sometimes just out of expression, or something like that. Then once again, we can't have a perfect pairing. So my argument again,
it still expresses something, right?
Does it?
There's some emotion or some.
Is it that it expresses something, or we're just saying it must express something, therefore it expresses something? We have a circular argument, which I'm looking like. Now, understand the way I just phrased this. I use thought and I use word. I can make this more empirical. I can go and I can use word and I can use object. I can do the same thing. And the thing I will say is, are there more than one way to refer to an object in this language? If there is, injective functionality is out. And then I'm going to go, can someone make up a word to refer to this object? And the same, can someone just come up with slang, explicits, anything like that can refer to potentially refer to an object or there? And if that's the case, surjective functionality is out. And in that just simple swoop, I'm making it so that classical area of philosophy in a mathematical sense is completely swept. Wittgenstein, this isn't me. People did this before me. I'm sweeping it completely under the rug and saying, bam, it's out. So the representationalist theory, where someone goes and they go, well, there's something that this is referring to, or this is, thought or object or something like that. And I'm like, I'm looking at them and I'm going, no, that's an absurd way to look at language or the way we express things or knowledge.
But it's classical theory, right?
Yes, it's classical. And I can get even deeper with this. So if we look at, okay, what about fictional characters? If we think about fictional characters, this is a great way to understand this. Bertrand Russell once posited a variation of an atomic proposition. Remember, that's the simplest way we can say something exists, all right? And he said something to the effect of, it was the King of England has a goatee. And he looked at people and he said, is this assertion true or false or anything like that? Now, it's a well-formed formula. It's a perfectly formed. So
it's like the King of France is bold also there.
Or you could say anything. But the thing was, there is no King of France, ergo he cannot have a goatee. Now, we can go even further and we can say Harry Potter has a lightning bolt scar, okay? Someone would say, oh, that makes sense. I've read about Harry Potter or anything like that. I'm like, no, that's also false in the representational area. You know why? Harry Potter is a fictional character. By definition, he is not. Ergo, he cannot have a lightning bolt scar. And then we can make this even more strange when I go, but dig this, sucker. If I said instead, J.K. Rowling wrote a book, and inside it was a fictional character called Harry Potter who had a lightning bolt scar. That is true. That's true. Probably, that would still pass. And this is kind of a person being introduced to possible worlds and what is real when you start looking at things in an abstract sense. And boy, is it trippy. But the idea that everything references something, if everything referenced something, there'd be definitions that cause, either mathematically or logically, we would have contradictions. And I'm showing some of those contradictions and how they would arise. And I look and I'd be like, why don't we just refer to everything as Marklar and say there are hotels on my feet?
It's like you subjectively make some again, fictional characters out of your imagination.
Yep.
And,
well,
then
there's
you create the entire world of these fictional characters. And
yeah, the thing is, even going further with this, if you take a logic class and people are talking to you about epistemology and logic and reference, one of the classic sayings people use to illustrate types of reasoning is they'll give you the premises, all Germans are European, okay?
mm-hmm.
Napoleon is German, therefore Napoleon is European. Now, people look and they go, wait a second, that conclusion is true. Napoleon was European, but they'll say, but Napoleon wasn't German. That's the thing. They'll look at it. And because this is getting trippy again. This is where I'm going like, wait. What makes you think I'm referring to Napoleon, the conqueror from France of 1884? You know, this specific person in time. At any point, I'd be like, no. I'm talking about my fictional character, Napoleon, who lived in Germany. And kind of like what I just did with qualifiers way back where I said, no one could argue against you at this point because you create a possible world. I just did the same thing with a premise through a fictional character. Like if I say my fictional character, my Napoleon, or my fictional character, Harry Potter, my fanfic of Harry Potter. And in this fanfic, he happens to be part leopard and speak Cantonese. I don't know. It would follow from that. That'd be a possible world that so long as I'm not, contradicting myself, I've properly axiomized. Oh, dear God, okay. So it was representationalism and functionalism. Functionalism was the other one. Jesus. Okay. Open the floodgates.
Yeah, I'm a read the definition from Wikipedia on functionalism.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Well, I can tell you what functionalism is.
Yeah, basically there's a belief, like the role which beliefs plays in perceptions, perceptions, beliefs, and actions, right? So the belief is true. If it's not about even truth, it's
you have to think of, okay, it's not that if what it's referencing is true, it's if what I say or assert is, I'm like playing a role, or I have a vocation when I do it. There's a kind of thing. That's a very important rule. Word, kind, remember that for functionalism. And there's a proper way to do it, okay? There's a proper way, and it doesn't even have to be a proper assertion. Last video, we talked a little about I brought up utterances towards the end of the video. And an utterance is something that may refer to something, it may not, and there's no truth or false value to it. And I use the example of like explicits when I say, damn it, or when I say, pleasantries like please or thank you. That's not referring to something, that's an action, or we could say a function I'm acting out in an appropriate manner given the context. And I can also act it out in an inappropriate manner, right? Like someone could, punch me in the gut and I could say, please, and go down and be like, what the hell does that mean? There's a way I can misfire it. I could possibly have it wrong. Really good book about this. It's pretty logic heavy. You have to have your logic down to do it. But Austin's How to Do Things with Words.
Oh yeah, like I'm currently reading John Searle's Speech Acts Theory.
Yeah,
and I've read it. Now I'm reading Intentionality. Now I've also read Expression and Meaning. Like I started reading his books like from the first one to gradually. Now I'm done the third book, but I'm going very slowly. Just
okay.
It took me half a year to
no, take your time, please.
Yeah. But he refers to John Austin all the time, like the theory of speech acts.
Yep. And
I guess it's called expressives. These there's assertions, directives, expressives, declarations, and,
orders. The linguistic terminology for all of them, if you want to memorize this, is phrased as locutionary acts, illocutionary
Yeah,
acts,
it's like
and perlocutionary acts is what they're called. So that's how we address kind of the umbrella, how we get all of them.
yeah, and there's
Locutionary acts, they're like
force.
idiomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Like, since no, I've read it, but I have nobody to discuss it with.
Yeah.
So
Well, you got me now.
yeah, good.
But it's a really cool functionalism. Mainly the biggest arguer for functionalism is a philosopher by the name of Hilary Putnam. And I like functionalism. I like it a lot. It's really good, both in epistemology and as another place it's seen often is a theory of mind, doing the mind-body problem. Now, I'm going to sit here and sing its praises, and I love it, but I don't want you to get too attached because I'm going to destroy it by the end of this. So there's a warning. Okay, but back to singing its praises. It's a really cool way where instead of viewing speeches like representations or assertions or anything, we view them as acts or
behavior, basically.
Behavior or something like that. Yeah. I'm doing something and I can do it in a certain way that's acceptable or unacceptable. Okay. It's a lot of the way that it looks at it. And this solves a lot of the problems of representationalism where they say everything needs to refer to something, we have these things, schmoogly dong can now just be an act that someone can look at and be like, the hell schmoogly dong, why are you saying that out? And they can say, I said something wrong. So it really brings back, and it is a reductive theory. So it is trying specifically for physicalism, it is trying to reduce things back into that physical kind of representational model, but instead of doing it just by pure reference, it's adding in functions. Okay. And a word I used earlier was how they kind of pair things is I talked about pairing earlier with representationalism, but they introduced a new pairing called kinds, or Putnam did. There's a kind of way to do something. And a big thing about kinds they are what Hilary Putnam calls multiply realizable. Big word. All that means is there's more than one way to do this act. There's no, it's got a little bit of give to it. All right. So I can say it solves the problem of injective functionality that I brought up, where I said, if I have multiple ways to do this, I kind of broke the 1-to-1 ratio and shattered it. Well, what the kinds does, think about this. I can say please to you, when I ask for something, or I can say, may I have that? Okay. There are multiple ways to do the same function and express it in a way that will, invoke an act that can either misfire or can go right. All right. Like I can say, instead of saying please when I ask for something, I could say, damn it. And you would be like, what the hell do you mean? It doesn't make sense. But big thing about that is understanding there are multiple ways to act out certain speech patterns that can causally be reacted to by other people participating, or can, deal with things individually in the real world. Terms I used later were, you can usually understand these speech called utterances or expressives in 3 terms, which is known as locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary. These are linguistic terms for the speech acts. Locutionary just means it has meaning or semantics, because this is really trying to focus on reducing semantics to functions that can have reference. And it just means it has meaning in almost an idiomatic saying. Okay. When I performed the speech act, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Okay. I'm not referring to an actual horse into water.
So
okay.
Metaphor.
It's a metaphor. What I'm referring to is I'm doing a function that just means, you can provide someone with a lot of evidence, but they may not necessarily believe it, or they may not go along if you help something like that. Similar thing with like when it rains, it pours. I'm not talking about actual rain and pouring. I'm just saying, I mean, when I'm performing a speech act, that just means when things are bad outside, when things are bad, they're really bad, is all I mean from it. Okay. And then there's illocutionary, which is inherently causally grounded. And this is where we get like our pleasantries or explicits, and usually stuff like, the best way to look at these is if in saying or by saying the act, I am doing the act that it refers to, or it's supposed to be. I order you to. When I say I order you to a person, I am doing the act by saying the act. It's the same thing. They have the same, or, you know, when I say I promise you, or something like that.
Or declarations, when we say, you know,
yes,
we declare.
You know, I declare, saying declare is declaring. It's the same thing, you know. So these were,
so indeed, and they changed the world, right? So this illocutionary act.
These are like the causally grounded, like the practical.
And there's the direction of feet from world to the word.
Yeah. There's a definite direction that I mean to go with this, or in something like that, that I'm applying it to something in the world, or something I'm bringing into the world as I'm saying it. Okay.
Yeah, by uttering a sentence.
Yep, you got it. And then perlocutionary, the last one, the big one is illocutionary. We already covered the big one, but perlocutionary is more so, how do I want to say this? Kind of descriptive. Okay. In saying or doing, in saying this, when I say things, I'm really kind of just, oh dear God, I'm describing the area where someone else used an utterance. Okay.
Oh, okay. I understand. Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, like you said you're describing the area when someone else uses utterance.
Yeah, it's kind
like
of like
I'm doing prelocution.
Sally promised to da da da, or something like that, or something like, it's very kind of third person removed. God, I don't know if I'm doing that entirely right. It's been a while since I applied perlocutionary, but that's how I remember it. Okay. And a big thing about all these is, like you said, with directionality of faith, is their functionalism, not only as epistemology, at its core, it's a theory of mind, specifically one of the physicalist theories of mind, which, if you know the other ones, they are behavioralism, identity theory, and finally functionalism. I'm going to argue of the three, functionalism is by far and away the best one, in my opinion. Okay, I hope you liked it, because I'm about to destroy it. So there are three arguments against physicalism in taking the theory of mind, or as it's in epistemological sense, or I'm sorry, in a metaphysical sense, with directionality to the world, okay, through our illocutionary arguments of destroying this. And for behavioralism, Hilary Putnam, the same person who argued for functionalism, I'm sorry, the biggest guy with kinds, argued against it with something he called his super Spartans, okay, which was, behavioralism says mind states are really only just behaviors or attitudes towards certain things, okay, that we can observe. A lot of it is based on the work of B.F. Skinner.
Yeah,
and the ideas
I've actually read this guy, like the entire book, like Science and Human Behavior, 5 years.
Yeah.
Was one of my first English books.
So Putnam pointed out the problem with this is, what if he came up with this concept, and he's like, what if we have this race, or these people of super Spartans or super Stoics, okay, who have these mental states or these, behaviors, but they never show it because they've been so trained not to show it or anything. Now, much like when you were talking about having pain and someone goes like, you're lying or something like this to hold you, how the hell would we know if the person never had anything indicative or showing of this area? They could have all these areas. And then identity theory, I don't remember who disproves that, but that's the thing where people say mental states or metaphysical areas are just indicative of a certain brain state or brain area, okay? there's a causal grounding in my in the firing of my
We
neurons
can
and
measure. We
synapses.
can measure
Yeah.
through fMRI.
You know, you disprove this by arguing, what about octopuses? And people will go, what are you talking about? It's like, does an octopus feel pain? Because I can reduce pain in my, we talked about this with, oh, it was Kripke. Okay, we talked about this with Kripke with C firing, the firing of C fibers in the brain a little bit. And basically, someone may look at that and they might go, oh, yes, I can look at this and I can say, I feel pain based off similarities, and we can correlate, you know, the firing of C fibers to pain in given patients and subjects. But the thing about an octopus's brain, now many of us will look and will say, yeah, octopuses are complex beings. They feel, I'm sure they feel pain and external, but the octopus has a completely different brain structure than a human does. It's made out of completely different area. Now, the thing is, if that's the case, and we're saying mind is just reducible to these brain states, then there can't be a case also where those brain states doesn't exist, but we're supposing mind. And that's what's going on with the octopus. All these problems, by the way, can be reduced down to Leibniz's problem, Leibniz's law. If you remember that with the equivalent sign, and I basically say, if you say this and this are the same thing,
identity,
I shouldn't be able to find one thing that differs between them. Is the basic thing. So that's kind of the refutation. Now, functionalism, golden age functionalism, the thing everybody loves. We argue against this with something that's called inverted qualia, is how we destroy this. And it basically says, functionalism argues that there's a function for each brain state with directionality, and really the inputs and outputs are the same. They're multiply realizable. The only thing that's different is how the person does the function. That's the multiply realizable part. Okay. Now, I'm gonna pose a question to you. What if there is a person who was born, but wherever there's green, they instead saw red, okay, or blue, or a different color. And now they've always paired the words, you know, they've been brought up, you know, in a family, and wherever there's green, they've been taught to, you know, where they see green, they've always been taught to say red. So they've always associated red.
So I see red, you see green, and but we refer to it with the same word, red. But we don't have the same visual experience.
Yeah, the same. Right? Well, the thing is, the inputs and outputs are, you know, from a physicalist point, they're the same. They would argue because there's one referential world, but someone would look and they say, well, eventually we'll have the exact same function. I would look and go, no, this person's been referring to a different thing the whole time, and they may never find out. They could do it the entire time because what they're using to refer to it isn't a physical thing. It's a concept. Red's just a placeholder for something at this time. So
yeah, it reminds me of twin Earth argument.
The what?
Twin Earth argument.
I don't know that.
Twin Earth. Let's
Okay.
suppose that there's twin Earth and there's you know, what we call water.
Yep.
Like on the twin Earth, they have the same water.
Yep.
But let's suppose they don't know that water is H2O. And when we use H2O, we point out at water and we say H2O. But for them, there's no concept of H2O.
Okay. It'd be more like if we see water and we always refer to water and we always point there and refer to water for them, they instead see, oh God, like they see a void. They don't see the water. They've just learned to associate water with this void from interacting with us all the time. And they just continue to do it. And the thing is, the functionalists would argue, well, eventually they would realize there's a misfire in their function and something. I'm looking like, no, they very well might not, because it has nothing to do with the objective world. They've just paired two abstract things and they're using them consistently. Because there's no way for it to be wrong if it's a qualitative area. So I'm sorry, I just took something you love behind the head and shot it. But
yeah, like a quality basically is something subjective, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's totally
Well,
subjective.
you have to understand the physicalist arguments, epistemologically or referential. A lot of it is they're trying to do kind of what the logical positivists did in that early area. They're trying to get rid of that metaphysical area and just make it very referential. And the thing is, what these arguments go to show is they bring back the abstract reasoning or the logic that a lot of these people worked on in the first place. And they go, well, given the logic you provided or people prior to you provided, we can show contradictions given what you're assuming. So
there's no way to go without metaphysics.
Yeah, it's a big thing about that took a bit, but it's worth it. Functionalism is fine. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess metaphysics will put it to the next conversation. I'm gonna study.
And you talk about metaphysics? Can you even? I mean,
well, we might try to, like, you know.
We definitely try.
In terms of you know, this what we discussed before, like you know, it's kind of fictional world, right? And
yes.
We might try to see what we can know. At least problems like free will, I guess, it's from metaphysics and
oh yeah.
Ideas like
one of the reasons I wanted to kind of move away from axology a bit and come to epistemology is I didn't get it on the board, but there was a concept we were going to get to that I've talked about before called known as ought implies can. A simple, very simple concept.
Can you repeat?
Okay. Oh, it's ought implies can.
Oh, okay. Ought implies. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, I remember.
And the fun thing about this concept is I'm going to argue if we understand this concept, specifically not just ought implies can, and understanding how to differentiate between ought and is, which this is an epistemological problem, which is and metaphysical one, which is, you know, how I think things should be is different than how things are. Okay. And if we look at can as kind of like my ability, okay, how I can act in the world or something like that, I'm going to argue this is central to understanding my theory of what I will say as freedom or free will or something like that, is understanding living in a world as it is, understanding my ability within that world as it is, and understanding my actions as they ought be, morally contingent, to how I think things ought be in the world as I bring them out. So that's a story for another time. So, but it's interesting because a big thing about that is getting the epistemology and making that hard distinction that I've been making really hard this whole time, back to axology and everything, about the possible world versus the actual world, or, you know, the abstract versus, you know, the factual, you know, kind of understanding this two-stage reality, you know, but
yeah, I guess it's a like distinction between philosophy and science ultimately. That
I think philosophy does deal with both of them. I'm going to say science by definition only deals with one of them. Mathematics, by the way, tries to only deal with one of them, and by consequence of other people's work winds up dealing with both of them. So but it's very interesting. I don't know.
But in terms of knowledge, like when we talk about what ought to be, right? And I guess like Kant springs to mind, like categorical imperative.
Well, what is ought? What does ought mean? To me, ought's at the center of Kant's deontology. Deontology meaning dutiful like ethics is what it is that it applies to. And ought to me is a declaration or an expression of moral duty. You ought to do this, or, you know, he ought, or something like that, is a big thing about what ought is. And it's very easy, and people do this all the time in common speak, where they confuse ought and is. What are the facts versus how they think they ought to be, and expressing their opinion comes into mind again, you know. And I think a big thing about that is, social constructivism does have a really good point into the fact that, yes, the world as we see it is seen, through our own lens or society's lens as it's presented to us through various means. And it isn't something that just comes to us that we see the world as it is. But what I'm attacking here is a very old argument for certain knowledge, a certain kind of knowledge from Locke and Hume called sense certainty. Okay.
Mhm.
Basically, the idea of removing all biases and just interacting with the world as it is, that kind of idea. And, the thing that
direct realism.
yeah, just
Mhm.
like I would call it, in modern terms, this might sound kind of cruel, but in modern terms, I would call it naive
Naive,
realism.
naive.
Yeah,
It's
like,
actually John Searle's take on.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But the argument I would have there is like, if you look at the world, okay, if we look at the world as just kind of like an art project or something like that, it's not that you just touch the wall. If I look at you and I say, can you paint that wall or paint it, apply it to a canvas without having to contextualize that wall in any way in your prior understanding? Like, that the wall is red, that the wall, is a wall, that, it has this texture to it. Can you represent it in any way without applying other concepts that you already knew or had something to presuppose? And this would be a hard argument, coherence favor. But the idea to me is I look at it and I go, no, you need to have something that you can contextualize, that you have something to kind of put it in. If it was just a 1-to-1 ratio, we have stuff that happens to us all the time that we don't understand, that we can't contextualize or don't have words for or anything like that. And what's the first thing we do? We look to like or analogous things
compare
to try to give it that contextualization. So a big thing about this to me is just arguing this idea, Hegelians would call it immediacy, the myth of immediacy, the idea that we can just have a 1-to-1 ratio with the physical world. And I would go, not really. Like, even in its most purest form, which would just be applying a subject or a name, instead of, talking about aspects of the wall, I just have the proper noun, the wall, that I'm using. I don't have any, any qualities, predicates or anything. But the thing is, the wall refers to something that, can you visualize a wall or have any aspect of a wall without visualizing also the qualities or predicates of a wall or anything about that? A good example of this is a classic thought experiment by Epicurus with nothing. The idea of nothing. And he went around and asked his students, and he's like, what does nothing look like? Can you picture nothing? And his students would go like, it's a black void, it's a white void, or it's something like this. And he's like, how can that, and this is going back to Harry Potter, how can that, which is defined as non-existent or not have any of these qualities or any of these predicates? And if you have a name, similarly, the wall, which has no qualities,
so
no predicates,
you can define, right?
There'd be nothing. Like,
as soon as you refer to it, you'll have to. Yeah, it's like thing in itself. I mean, in Kantian.
Yes, that is exactly what it is. Like the idea that I can just have that. Except it should be stated, Kant argued against the 1-to-1 ratio quite hard. That was the whole reason he came up with the thing in itself, the transitive and thing in itself, and the noumena and phenomena. So, but yeah,
but like considering this ought, like what ought to be when we use illocutionary acts, and for example declare something, right? We decide, oh, this is how it should be. And
we're bringing that, we're kind of bringing that out into the world, aren't we?
Yeah. And then we, try to act upon our declarations. And this, in this case, we may say, yeah, that's how things should. And the same with a promise, right?
Yeah.
You give a promise, and then
No, that's a really cool idea. Are you ready for me to take it behind the shed and shoot it?
sure.
Okay.
Go on.
Austin's book, he does what's known as Boolean logic with his misfires and his functions and grounding. Boolean logic just reduces all logical phrases down to conjunctions or disjunctions, okay? Ands or ors, okay? It reduces everything down to that. And when you do this and you apply it to possible outcomes, it looks like trees, like trees that go down like whoop, whoop, and then, whoop, whoop, little tiny trees that come down like this, like a flow chart. It's kind of what it looks like. It can go from this to this to this to this is what happens. And he was able to reduce functions of illocutionary utterances. Boy, that's a phrase. That's a sentence. Down to what he said, 3 misfires, areas where it could fail to be objective. And he called these misinvocations, misexecutions, and lastly, insincerities. That's what he called these. Misinvocations just means you use the word at the wrong time, okay? You're using the word, I'm at a wedding and I say, let us mourn the departed. Misexecutions means the action that follows the word is wrong, okay? I say, I salute you and raise my middle finger. That would be wrong. It's another way to look at it. But the last one's what we're considered with, insincerities, okay? And it comes from a rule that he put down. And he said, this is going to take us back to ethics and morality and why they're separated, is he said, it's implied that the person believes what they're saying and doing, okay, when they say it out in the world. So when I bring that ought out into the world, I could come out and I could say, I think there ought to be a tree here. I declare, something, or, I promise you, or something like that, or something odd. Thing is, I can never intend to follow through with my promise. I can never tend to follow through with my salute. I can salute and not mean it. I can, is the big thing. I can order somebody to do something, but, be kind of insincere about it, really feel I'm kind of under that person or something like that. And they could laugh at, that's a bad example. But there's ways that I can use these words, even in a causally grounded or
without intending, right?
Yep, without it.
Yeah, but still, if we're talking about like collective intentionality, like when we're trying to understand what's right form of behavior, and it seems that everybody, like if there's many people and we decide to do something together, it looks like as if we have to, like, you may say, like, everybody may, like, there's one crazy leader and he says, like, we all have to declare war, and we say, yeah, we declare war, but everyone doesn't believe in what they're saying.
Here's the thing. We generally look at people and we say, we acknowledge this disconnect, but for the most part, we're able to, bring our thoughts and the oughts out into the world and do these things and these functions. And I'm going to look and I'm going to go and like, oh yeah, I see it quite a bit of the time, but I don't see it all the time, nor could it be all the time, so long as there exists. This is back to quantitative negation, a law I used last time. As long as I can point out one instance where it doesn't exist, I can still refute it. And okay, people are going to say I'm being pedantic here. The big thing for me is, if you want to destroy the idea of mind or make it fully physical, in a really rigorous manner, what I'm doing is I'm doing something called proving the contrary. Or a contradictory proof. I'm testing it. I'm stress testing it. I'm coming up with one possible instance or one necessary instance as it actually happened. And I'm basically going, bam, your theory falls flat over and over again. But this is the hard part, because we can look and we can say, we'll get into skepticism with this. We can say we have a general feeling, a general certainty, subjective certainty, that it's useful to think of the world this way and kind of grasp it.
Yeah, but
you always,
the world doesn't care, basically, right?
yeah, it doesn't care.
Mhm.
And not to mention, you'll always have in the back of the mind that you can't refute, that highly skeptical or rigorous argument that the person posited you, because they did rigorously refute you in that area. They did not make a mistake. So, okay. I don't know. I went off on a bit of a tangent again.
Yeah, it's pretty dense today.
Yes, it
I
is.
have really hard.
Quite a day.
uh
Hang in there, bud.
yeah, I guess we might take on skepticism and then finish this after.
Okay, I believe you wanted to ask a question about in knowledge, rationalism, empiricism, and skepticism.
Yeah, and how to
Right?
deal with skepticism. I have some some papers here. So, for example, there's such thing as the regress problem.
Mhm.
The problem of providing a complete logical foundation for human knowledge.
You can't.
The traditional way to support a rational argument is appealing to other rational arguments, typically using chains of reason and rules of logic. To justify a belief, one must appeal to a further justified belief. This means that one of two things can be the case. Either there are some beliefs that we can be justified for holding without being able to justify them on the basis of any other belief, or else for each justified belief, there is an infinite regress of potential justification. In this theory, there's no rock bottom of justification. Justification just meanders in and out through the network of beliefs, stopping nowhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what I'm going to say is I'm going to believe, yes, there are things there are things we have which have no justification. They're called assumptions and axioms, and just basis of beliefs, abstract things that we just say, I'm going to assume that this is the case and start moving on. Now, the big thing is, because this focuses on justification, and I never broke down JTB. I'm going to do that really quick and then focus justification here. Justified true belief. I brought it up, I think, earlier in our talk. Just is the philosophical accepted definition of knowledge, and it just means truth. It means that it refers to something objectively in our world that's referring to something. Belief means that you believe it, that it is true, that it refers to something in the objective world. And justification, this is the nitty gritty. Justification is the means of kind of proving, showing, or building the theory.
Reasons for your
belief. The main two things that if I would focus for justification are abstract justification, which is rigor, which you're going to hear mathematicians say all the time, are means to arriving at the conclusion given these assumptions. All right. When you were in a math class and your teacher always said, show your work, show your work, show your work, don't just write down the answer, show how you got there. What she was actually doing at that point was teaching you to think rigorously, show how you got from here to here, show your process. And then on the more empirical side, that was more rational, coming to truths through pure thought and abstract. On the more empirical, through experience, we have evidence, okay? Things that I cite or, I have that can support an argument. Now, the big thing is, and this is where the skepticism is going to come in. The big thing is, with rigor, because it can work in a deductive, an area of deductive reasoning. Now, deductive reasoning, God, there's a lot of definitions. Deductive reasoning just says, from a set of assumed premises, I have a conclusion that follows, a sound or verifiable conclusion, okay? Doesn't deal with any observations or anything like that. I can just say, if it rains, then it pours. It rains, therefore it pours. That's a deductive proof. That's using modus ponens.
Modus ponens.
Yep. And then on the other side of that, we have induction, which is a much different type of reasoning, which this is the textbook definition. So anybody watching this, taking their tests, you'll be good to use this. Goes off of a set of complete observations to a general conclusion. That's what it is. Okay. I observe, let's say I'm sitting around the world, my room. A lot of this is pattern recognition. Okay. And I use the stove and touch. Okay. Say I have a hand that can feel pain. When I touch the stove, I feel pain. All right. And I notice every single time that I touch the stove, I'm feeling pain. I can come to the conclusion that, touching the stove causes pain. The reason that this matters is I'm going to say deductive reasoning doesn't deal with knowledge. It's not epistemological. I'm going to say in the fact that it doesn't need reference. It doesn't have to have anything in the world to make it function.
It's analytical, basically, reasoning, right? Yeah. So, and
that's the exact word.
Inductive, it's synthetic.
Yeah, and inductive, it does try to deal with observations by definition in the world and coming to conclusions. Now, there's a third form of reasoning that people usually forget about, that some people teach, some people don't. I think it's worthwhile teaching. And that's called abductive reasoning. Okay. It doesn't mean to abduct someone or steal them and then explain why you did it. It's a very particular form of induction that means an incomplete set of observations to a probable conclusion. Okay. If you've ever had your science teacher try to teach you what a hypothesis is without saying educated guess, this is what they were getting at. Okay. It means I noticed that a friend of mine and another friend went out and ate sushi last night. Okay. And the next morning, they're both sick. Okay. And I conclude that they ate bad sushi. Okay. Now, people have a real hard time differentiating between this and induction. They can have a real hard time with this. The difference between abduction and induction, though, is I am observing the Yep. In induction, I am observing the conclusion that the stove hurt my hand. That did happen. Like that happened. In abduction, I'm coming to a probable conclusion. I'm saying it might be the case that they ate bad sushi. There's a possibility it could be something completely unrelated. All right. The other one has to do with a complete set of observations versus an incomplete set of observations. Okay, induction works off a complete set of observations. I'm saying these are the observed areas that have to do with this instance of happening. Okay, versus incomplete set of observations. I'm making first impressive. I'm just kind of experiencing things from the first time and building a guess. Okay, it would be called prima facie in philosophy and law. It's called first impressions. So the big thing that differs between this and the scientific method is abductive would be your hypothesis, how you build and remake a hypothesis. It's your guess that you're just going off of first impressions. Inductive would be theory. You got it. That you have a testable and observable conclusion that can exist separate of your hypothesis, that can either prove, disprove, or have nothing to do with it. It's an observed conclusion. That happened. It's determined. It doesn't matter what you thought beforehand. Okay, now coming to skepticism. Okay, so skepticism is going to posit that we can't have a certain form of knowledge. This is going to be the big area. They're going to say we can't have certain knowledge, and all forms of knowledge eventually break down. They will break down into either rational assumptions or something that tears itself apart if we really recursively look at it. The biggest person who did this was Hume, and he did it specifically for induction, is what he did. And what I'm going to argue is I'm going to argue for Hume, and I'm going to look and I'm going to go, now, the observed instance of my hand touching the stove did happen, and it hurt. And I can say that happened regardless, and that I have authority to knowledge or anything of it. The problem is the relationship of the observed premise. Specifically, why is it that I say that me touching the stove caused the effect of my hand to hurt and not my hand hurting cause the effect of
Like
me
you
touching the stove. Yep. And this is going to come down to the rational, what a skeptic's going to say is going to say, because knowledge or empiricism presupposes rationality, specifically directionality of causation, that I perceive the world in a certain way, time, Augustine, or even all the way up to Stephen Hawking would argue this is what we call the psychological arrow of time, that I perceive the world in a certain way and I order it in a certain way. And the big thing about this with me touching the stove and everything is if it happened in a different order or I perceived it in a different order, I would come to a completely different hypothesis given my abductive reasoning. I wouldn't come to the conclusion, that, it's possible that touching the stove hurts. I would come to the conclusion that it hurts causes touching the stove at the different area. The only thing that's fixed in this area is that conclusion of the induction that touch the stove and hurt, which that isn't causation, that's correlation. That two things happened at the same time is the same thing. And I'm forming that causal chain through a rational concept prior. This is kind of how a skeptic destroys all certainty and knowledge, because it basically comes down to, well, if it's this rational thing that I have to presuppose, and it's something that can only be enforced through evidence a little bit further, but never can be certain because, I don't know why it went this way or went this way. I just kind of assumed it. It can never be certain. It can only be something that I build on the theory that touching the stove causes hurting my hand. I can never say for certain that always touching the stove will hurt my hand. And there's another argument for this, which we've already done the rigor for, which is all swans are white. That's a classical argument, which, if there's the possibility of a black swan, not even discovering, just that there's the possibility of not a white swan is enough to stop you from saying that all swans are white, which, that destroys what's known as necessity or universal truths in an empirical sense.
So is skepticism therefore invincible?
I think no. Now, a lot of people look at this and they say, man, skepticism destroyed knowledge, man. It beat it into the ground and knowledge is pointless. And I'm like, no, it didn't. It saved knowledge. It made knowledge what it is knowledge is a doubtful and discovering thing. It's not supposed to be like math. It's something different is you don't understand, if it was like math, it wouldn't be any fun. We wouldn't be able to have any of the truths or anything. It's not, to me, it's not an insult. It's actually, something to say pridefully to scientists that they are on a journey that has no end, and yet they're still doing it and going about it, or empiricists a lot, but what this is basically meant to show, though, is going all the way back to the definitions for knowledge, facts, going coherent in all things that we've crossed in these areas, is to kind of come to this area and understanding that, to me, given these definitions, all this logic that I've gone through, all these citations and everything like that, is that epistemology and metaphysics are bifurcated, separated for sufficient reason for understanding each field. And given these reasons, it ought to remain these things if I am to further my understanding. Bringing them together or conflating would hurt my understanding, and therefore I won't do it. So that's back to something I did towards monism way earlier on. It's the same rational. But yeah.
So you may study them separately, and
now here's the thing: they can affect one another, and this was the Descartes, Rene Descartes, the granddaddy of dualism, and I think had a refutation from the Princess of Holland, I forget her name, when he came up with separating mind and the world, where she said, well, each can affect one another, ergo they can't be different. And I would look and I would go, I can look at things all the time that, given Leibniz's law, that I can differentiate all the time, that do cause and affect one another, that I can give particularity to one and another thing. Okay, even fictional characters to real characters. J.K. Rowling definitely had a causal relationship with Harry Potter, though Harry Potter wasn't real, because if not J.K. Rowling, then not Harry Potter. I mean, I can do this. So I would look at her argument and be like, funk them. But
I would like to get back and ask about Gettier problem, like a justification, justified to believe, right? And
where it fails.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's the one where the guy is out tending. There's a couple of them. There's one where a guy's out, tending his his herd of sheep or something like that or whatever. And apparently he's out at a tree or something like that. And he looks out and he sees what he thinks, someone asks him, hey, is your sheep safe in the field? And he looks out and he sees what he thinks is his sheep in the field being safe. And he goes, yeah, my sheep is safe in the field because I have justification, because I observe it right over there. It's something I believe is true. It references something in the world and I have justification to believe it true. And as he walks away, we in this amazing third person perspective get to pan over and see that the sheep was actually like a clothesline with a few things hanging off. It wasn't his sheep at all. And actually his sheep was somewhere else and safe in the field. So the conclusion that he arrived at was true, but his justification wasn't true. And that's one of the problems. The other one is, something like a guy gets told the person with 50 cents in their pocket will be hired today, and, he goes into the interview, thinking his pockets are empty, looks at the guy next to him. The guy, happens to pull out 50 cents and he's like, I'm not going to get this job, or something like that. And so he starts walking away and all of a sudden he looks in his pocket, pulls out, he's like, oh, I did have 50 cents, and maybe he got hired or didn't get hired. It doesn't matter. In either case, there's justification for him to believing one way or the other. So the problem with Gettier problems is that they're very hypothetical and they deal with things, like instances where kind of like what I was talking about with Napoleon, where, we can come to true conclusions through referentially through false premises. Okay. And the thing I'm going to say about Gettier problems is because they're such abstract hypotheticals, they're actually working off of not observations, they're working off of deductive logic. You assume there's a person and watching over his field, or there's a thing that is not his sheep. Person comes to conclusion sheep is safe in the field, but we've also assumed that the sheep is safe in the field. So what happens is we give two different translations to not a sheep. It's not actually not a sheep, it's clothesline with some areas, and sheep is still safe in the field, so we can be consistent. Oh, that was a mouthful. Did you understand that?
Well, yeah, I already lose clarity,
sorry.
because no, it's too abstract. I think I can see what you're saying, but I would definitely have problem trying to explain how I understand it now, because it will my mind for days.
if you think of it something similar to the problem with the trolley problem or something like that, where we abstract it so far out and make a potential hypothetical.
When I read on Wikipedia about this Gettier problem, it seems like when I read, I understand every word, every sentence, but then I try to make it up on my own and I see, well, it's kind of, no, I may even remember, I may even memorize the whole thing, but it doesn't allow me to see, it's very kind of fictional, not real. I can't imagine anything like that.
Well,
or it's very hard to imagine, but and then when I need to talk about it, it just makes no sense. When I utter words, they don't mean anything.
Well, I think the thing that Gettier problem actually gives us that's very worthwhile is an understanding of what evidence is in practical situations, things that we look at and cite to, evidence in the most broadest definition is anything cited or submitted to support an argument or practical stance. That's what it is in the most broadest definition. Now, the thing about that, though, is anybody who studies law, science, philosophy will tell you there are different types of evidence, and certain types of evidence hold higher sway than other types of evidence. You know, a good place of this is like in law, okay?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer, by the way.
What's up?
I'm a lawyer, by the way.
Oh, well,
yeah, I've graduated from.
You'll understand this perfectly. Testimony or hearsay holds a pretty low area.
I don't work like a lawyer, but I studied at university.
Okay, yeah. Excellent. Then you'll understand this. I think you'll understand this. So any testimony that's adduced or cited for continuing, what would be an affidavit? Yeah, or a statement or anything, a stance in court, would be pretty much seen as lower than like physical evidence that's supported or anything. Like if someone gives eyewitness testimony, it usually would be taken as less important than like, yeah, than just like, you know, a camera. Like we have video of what happened at that point. And usually in law, what you see is, you know, eyewitness testimony usually only exists for it to be cross-examined and give a part that someone can discredit it, that they can go away from it. Now, a lot of this goes true into philosophy too, because philosophy is actually where the terminology where we make a hard differentiation between testimony and evidence. Philosophers have a definite word for testimony and a definite word for evidence. Testimony being hearsay, something that somebody says that may or may not be an accurate representation of the circumstance. It's an opinion, like an opinion masquerading as a fact is what it kind of is. And evidence has a strong area that it is, you know, objectively something objective referential using facts to cite an area or support an argument. Okay. Now,
but there may be different evidence, right? Or contra evidence.
Yes, because potentially anything can be cited as evidence to support an argument, pretty much anything. Now, whether or not it's a good idea or we can see any relationship between evidence, someone may say, you know, it's warm outside because, you know, I have socks on my feet. There's my evidence. We would say, what's the relationship between these things? It doesn't seem to make sense. But the big thing about this, with the Gettier problems, is just showing that evidence is inherently, it can support arguments, but it's never the argument itself. Okay. It can help your argument, it can hinder it, but it is never the point of reference or the thing you're asserting yourself. The assertion is something you come up with and throw out. Okay. And the big thing about that is evidence can be wrong. It can be falsified. It can be completely off kilter. You know, the clothesline with you know, the sheep or something like that. Someone else could come along and say, oh, you were right, but your evidence was wrong. Your argument was separate from your evidence. So the way that you supported it was shitty, but your argument turned out to be right. I don't know. The biggest thing about this is a takeaway is that the evidence is the argument. They're two very different separate things. I don't know. I don't know if that helps with the Gettier problems or the thing that I wanted to help with. The argument itself, the thing he's coming up with, that circumstance for everything, that's like his argument right there, where he's coming up with a very, you know, hypothetical thing. And then the evidence that, you know, he's using fictional evidence within that hypothetical thing to support or discredit this very hypothetical area. And the thing is, it's not evidence in the first place. It's not objective. It's something you hypothetically came up with. So it's evidence in a fictional area.
Yeah, it's like we discussed, you know, this idea that somebody is born and he sees red as green, and you know, you can never tell.
Yeah. Well,
but you still may use this example as a kind of thought experiment to prove something that you tried.
Yeah. For the record, I do think there is something, if I provide my own definition of knowledge centered around the definition of facts, and I do think justified true belief does have some problems with it. I'm not a huge fan of it.
Mhm.
I don't like truth in knowledge. I don't like having that there.
Mhm. So
That
it's
often it leads people to think knowledge is something it's not.
some kind of redundancy theory.
Oh yeah.
Mhm. Deflationary theory, right? The term does not denote a real property or of the term does not denote a real property of sentences or propositions. The predicate true is an expressive convenience, not the name of a property requiring deep analysis.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Like okay.
Yeah, but they like whenever
I have a
ask-
simpler way to say
yeah,
it.
yeah, when you just simply say something, you don't need to say whether it's true or it's false. So
Yeah.
by expressing an idea, right? It's you assume that this is true, unless you're proven wrong.
You're assuming it's true unless you don't intend to prove that it's true.
So I don't need to say the sky is the sky is dark. This is true that the sky is dark. Simply by saying the sky is dark, I already assume that this is this is the case.
Yeah,
Okay.
it could be true or it could not be of your expression. That being said, if you want to express it, you got to contextualize it within that area. I don't know. The biggest thing to me of that is something we talked about last time, where I just looked and I'm like, look, truth and false values of assertions, they're not these magical things that align to the world outside. It's an expression of binary. That's all it is. It's saying there's two possibilities, and I can use this expression of a base 2 model, 2 to the nth power, given the variables in that set, to say, here's going to be the possible outcomes of it. So it's very abstract. It's not even designed to deal with it. I can make it work with, that's what kind of we were doing with atomic facts and atomic propositions, where we say what's the simplest way I can state the circumstance, and what's the simplest way that I can say something is, but it exists completely separate of that. It doesn't really care. P could be, a variable can have any given translation. I mean, any possible translation given to it. And the soundness or verifiability of the expression will be the same. It doesn't matter. It exists entirely separate of it. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we've been talking for 2 hours already.
Oh yeah, we have
Covered a lot of territory. Yeah.
Yeah, we have.
I'm gonna watch it tomorrow to make timestamps, and I've noticed that whenever I watch it the second time, it makes so much more sense. I don't know why.
It could be while you're in it and trying to make sense while also participating.
Yeah,
you feel kind of overwhelmed, but a lot of times when you can go back and just take your time and piece it apart and just really focus.
Yeah, I'd like to watch it after a couple of years to see how I'm going to study philosophy in depth in near future, and I'm interested how it will reflect my understanding in the when I go back and check what was I thinking this time. But anyway, Frank, thank you so much.
No problem.
Because
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, the right place to end it.
Okay.